Dobar dan, good morning to everybody. I hope you had an interesting discussion this morning with the breakout groups. I definitely had one in the group that was discussing migration and refugee crisis in Europe. My name is Goran Buldioski. I'm director of the Open Society Initiative for Europe and the Think Tank Fund, which are both part of the Open Society Foundations. And I have the honor and the privilege to moderate this session of this lovely panel, which is gender balanced. And I take it as my task today also not only to be balanced in that sense, but as well to be balanced in terms of the different opinions that we will hear. We have actually, the organizers were very generous. They gave us the bloated term of the European model of governance. So probably they felt that that's way too big to be discussed in 90 minutes. So we have a good 2 hours before the Prime Minister Vučić comes and addresses the conference at 2 o'clock. And I do hope that we will be able to look at various ways on this issue. Let me just reflect on because that was something that really caught my attention, and then without much of a further ado, I will introduce the panelists and go into the discussion. I really like in the title that the organizers put a sort of a definitive model of European governance. As someone who lives in Budapest and who comes from Macedonia, I have to say I'm very far from looking at the European model on governance, and actually that's probably one of the underlining sort of currents that I will try and start to push in this discussion. The other thing is we will start more with the general issues, and as I said, it's a pretty bloated term. There's a lot of issues under that, and I will try to put the issues in sort of three different if you want, clusters. I mean, first to look at the state of democracy and the governance models within European Union and within Europe as a sort of a first round of questions where I will ask the panelists. Then I think we should not escape from the issue of the refugee crisis, of the asylum seekers and the migration, and address what has been in the corridors of this conference as well, which is how and does it change the current opinion about Europe, European Union, and as well democracy and the democratic standards within European Union and outside of it. And then sort of a third round of questions will look more at the future, and I hope that we will look at maybe a short visioning exercise of looking at where our panelists see the future of Europe and the different models or the different developments in near or more distant future. Since we have 2 hours, I also believe that we will have also a generous time for your questions. I took it as a minimum to have half an hour, but if we finish earlier, I will definitely open the floor for more questions. So, without further ado, I will start with the first round of questions, and as I do that, before I will introduce the panelists, the question on the democracy, and my first question will go to Michael Davenport, who for many of you, or probably all of you know well, he's a career diplomat. He's at the moment serving as a head of mission of the European Union here in Belgrade to Serbia. But before that has an extensive experience into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the United Kingdom, and has worked on issues not only related to the Balkans, but as well Russia, South Caucasus, Central Asia, and as well has been involved in issues related to as far as Poland and Egypt and other assignments. Michael, I have basically the one question for you, which is big, but let me preface the question with something what I saw in the Pew study and in a way puzzled me. So the Pew study that was published earlier this summer of the big 6 countries, France, Italy, Germany, UK, Spain, and Poland, big 6 within the European Union, actually had 61% of the respondents expressing positive views of European Union. And apparently there is an increasing trend in number of countries. But by the same token, the very same study says, but 50% of Germans, 58% of Italians, 66% of Brits, and 70% of Spanish people they actually support or they feel there is a need for Eurosceptic parties, and rise of the non-traditional parties is a good thing. How that and how the general sort of mood about democracy and the issues that we talk today. So what is the health of democracy looked from the European Commission perspective, and in a way your take on the state of affairs today?
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for including me on this panel this year. I think it's right to say that I've been at every one of the forums since the first one that Sonia launched here in Belgrade. Just very personally, first of all, you introduced me as a career diplomat, but I should emphasize that my training is in the law. And I am speaking here personally rather than as a representative of the Commission. In any case, I don't actually represent the European Commission, but the European Union under the Lisbon Treaty. My training in English law as a solicitor also involved working in the area of human rights in the United Kingdom, and as a volunteer in citizens' advice bureaus and human rights centres in London in the 1980s. I can assure you that I would be the last person to claim that everything is right or everything is rosy, including in European Union member states. Ensuring the respect for rule of law and human rights is an ongoing challenge. It's something we always have to keep on working at. You never actually get to a settled state. I'm interested by your statistics from the Pew study. If by Euroscepticism you mean wanting to make Europe function better, wanting to make the European institutions function better to safeguard the interests of citizens more effectively, then I think we can all call ourselves Eurosceptics. I mean, just looking at the questions that you put, of course, if you want to give a sort of dry, evidence-based answer on the strength of other surveys, such as the Freedom House Index or the Economist Intelligence Unit or Human Development Index, we can see that in the Freedom House Index, all 28 European Union member states are in the top 2 categories. In the Human Development Index, only 2 countries of the European Union are outside the top 50. 10 of the top 16 in the Economist Intelligence Unit Democracy Index are from the EU, but 3 under the EIU Index are outside the top 50. So what does this tell us? It tells us, on the one hand, that by most objective standards, European Union member states perform relatively well against international criteria. But it does also indicate that it is a diverse picture, that the picture across the European Union is not uniform, and that there are in terms of performance against international human rights standards, human development indices, there are issues. I suppose if you look at an overall pattern, it's perhaps indicative to see that out of the 10 countries that are in the top 16, 9 are long-standing European Union member states. Only 1 joined the European Union from 2004 onwards. But I think I should also say, it's not just me who takes the view that we should not be simply painting a rosy picture. I think that time comes sometimes for a degree of humility. I think that President Juncker showed that also in his State of the Union address the other day, in which he specifically said that the time has come to speak frankly about the big issues facing the European Union across the board, including the handling of the refugee crisis. And he was very clear that the European Union is in many respects not in a good state. His prescription was that there's not enough Europe in the Union, and there's not enough Union in the Union. But of course, at the same time, the achievements that the European Union represents, the achievements during its period of existence since the end of the Second World War, do mean that the European Union, or perhaps individual member states of the European Union, actually do represent a kind of beacon of hope and some sort of a haven, especially for those who are fleeing war-torn and conflict-ridden regions. I think it's also important to recognize that when it comes to many of the issues that are at the center of handling a crisis such as we're facing at the moment, but also other crises that the European, let us recognize that this is not the first major crisis that the European Union has had to face. The economic crisis is not over and in many respects still represents a huge challenge. The European Union is the sum of its parts. It's also still evolving, and the way in which the European Union tackles the challenges that it faces, I think, inevitably contributes to shaping the way in which we evolve and the way in which we the way in which we are going to be able to face the future. It's not reached a settled state. It's also true to say that when it comes to democracy and respect for human and fundamental rights, each of the member states and each of our countries, Serbia included and countries of this region included, have developed at different speeds. If I look at my own country, we recently celebrated the anniversary of Magna Carta in the United Kingdom. But the respect for human rights and democracy has evolved over time. Many of the key steps that were taken were the result of conflict and also great suffering. And even now, there is an argument raging in the United Kingdom about the way in which the institutions should be structured best to represent citizens' interests. The issue of the House of Lords, for example. I'm not going to go into a comparative approach of all 28 European Union member states, but I think we should be realistic, we should be humble in our approach, but we should also be ambitious about where we want to go, and we should be clear when we see infringements of fundamental principles which bind European Union citizens and member states.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I particularly like the humbleness and the ambition, and that seems to, it was in short supply until it was resurrected. So somehow probably in that order. I would like to move to Professor Gesine Schwan, who comes from Germany. She has a rich political career with the Social Democratic Party, also a candidate for the office of the German federal presidency in 2009, but as well equally rich career as a political sciences, a dean and a professor and founder of the Humboldt-Viadrina governance platform in Berlin. And I would say if you look at all the bios that the conference organizers provided, probably the most interesting position is the chairwoman of the Commission on Fundamental Values of the SDP. Quite an interesting position. I will really follow this thread, which is talking about the European Union, but maybe from a German perspective. And as I dig some numbers, and I promise all of you, it will be only in the first round that I will say some numbers, and later we'll go more into the concepts. In the Eurobarometer, published 1 month after the Pew study, the German people actually expressed, really 86% of them said, like, we are in a good economic position. But only 38% said the same about the European Union. And in a way, I think it's a sort of at least in my reading of the dry numbers, a relatively big dissonance of what the German population sees about the health of its own economic development. And as an outsider also, I would observe that the health, as we see from outside, of the German democracy, we deem it's high, it's good, but how does it feel from inside, both at the national level, but as well at the level of European Union?
I mean, first of all, I'm always a little skeptical towards these surveys because they homogenize the attitude or the value system of a society which is not at all homogenetic. We see that with the attitude of Germans towards refugees. The one burned down possible asylum houses, the others welcome them at the station of Munich. So we have a broad variety of positions within that. What the Germans have been told during the last years, as well by the media as by the government, was that we are wonderful and the others not. That is a kind of mission which everybody was told. And in fact, the German economy in the last years worked much better than others. What are the reasons for that? I let them out. But this is a kind of dichotomy in which the Germans have lived for years. I think that is not very good because it has been accompanied also by moral judgments about who is good in economy is good in general and who is bad in economy is bad in general or has moral reasons for being bad. And all these kinds of interpretations have been very bad. If it goes to the democracy, I think in general we can say that until '89, democracy was a real issue because we had the East-West conflict, we had a communist system, etc., and everybody would say democracy is important, better, etc. Even in the feelings of societies, especially in the eastern part of Europe, in contradiction to what they lived every day with the suppression, bureaucracy, dictatorship, democracy was something which was important in their daily life. We live now in another mental, cultural environment. I would diagnose that in the following way. During the last 20, nearly 30 years, more and more an idea has been proposed which would say the market is much better than political decision-making. Political decision-making is full of bureaucracy and corruption, etc., whereas the market is open, transparent, objective, etc. So this is, of course, tied to a certain economic lesson of neoliberalism. And in that context, also, as well, I would say in Eastern Europe, maybe even more in Eastern Europe than in Western Europe, the younger generation was not that much anymore interested in democracy, but in a good, well-functioning economy. This was the kind of priority which in our German political culture studies after the Second World War, and I'm an older generation, so I was studying in that time, which was a bad sign for democratic culture, because the important was to really respect democratic rights, free press, etc., and not so much well-being, economic well-being. This was always a sign of an older authoritarian tradition in Germany. So, but that has come in general up. And I would say now, in present life, and I just referred to that, I do not want to speak now about refugees, but as a sign, we see that the political culture, the convictions, the attitudes of a society are really in a big variety, and they have a large spectrum. And what is important is, and they have also potential, that is also coming out of any research on political culture. You do not have an existing culture, you have potentials. And if, for instance, a certain event or a series of events does provoke certain resentments or certain other feelings, then the culture goes more to that direction. And if there are other environments, it is better. Important is, in my view, that the last years in the European Union were spent, and especially by the German government, by national governments, or were shaped by national governments, which especially looked at the national and short-sighted national advantage. We could see that with all the press conferences, whenever somebody came back from Brussels, they had to teach their national media that they had gotten an advantage from any Brussels conference. And if you preach such a kind of disintegrated view on Europe, you should not wonder that this has certain consequences. So what is absolutely necessary, in my view, is not only for the European Union, but also for democracy on the national level, is to again value one of the fundamental values of democracy, which is not only liberty and not only justice, but also solidarity. You cannot make justice without solidarity. You have absolutely the necessity to live in solidarity, and that does not mean reciprocity, as it had been defined a number of times also by the German Chancellor, but solidarity is that you give something without reciprocity. You might expect in future that there will be some nice things, but solidarity is first of all that you give it, and that you should not suspect solidarity as a means to undermine responsibility. That was something, that was a kind of sermon which was all the time given also in the Euro crisis. If you help them, then you will get again irresponsible. This was the fundamental idea, and if you start like that, you cannot do any democracy on the national level nor on the European level. If you start again to understand that we have in all European societies responsible segments and irresponsible segments, and the irresponsible segments are sometimes very powerful because they deal with other stuff than political. They are powerful in the economic sense. If you do not accept that it is not just the northern Protestant people, I happen to be a Catholic, northern Protestant people who are responsible, and the southern, they are irresponsible, having their style of life, etc. If you do not overcome such divisions, if you do not have a fundamental trust in the potential of responsibility of all people in general, but also of all Europeans, you won't go on with democracy, but you will always try to have the counterpart. This is control, rules, rules, control, control, rules. And you probably understand what I mean by these words and these suggestions.
Yes, thank you very much. You said so much, and later I will come back to some of these issues when we talk about the future. You know, you mentioned the solidarity as well. You know, how to overcome the fear of disintegration, and we'll come back to that when we talk in the later rounds. I would like to basically give the floor to Mr. Franco Frattini, who here in Serbia doesn't need a specific introduction. He's been a special advisor almost for 2 years to the Prime Minister, but also he doesn't need a special introduction to both Italian and European audience. He has been twice a Minister of Foreign Affairs in various Italian governments, served all other functions, has been Vice President of the European Commission, and as well in charge of the portfolio Commissioner for Justice, Freedom and Security. Now, the question to you is probably similar as what I asked for Germany, but in this case, Italy and European Union. So at these two levels, and in a way, let me stick to my populist approach. And I was very aware about that because politicians so much love these numbers and studies, and more populist they are, more numbers matter. So I thought for the first round I will do. When I was doing my homework, one thing what was really interesting is actually the favorable views of European Union in Italy and how they rose over time. They dipped in 2014 and then they rose again to 64%. So obviously an increased belief, or at least that's what numbers shows in European Union. But what's your take on both Italian democracy and as well vis-a-vis European Union?
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for inviting me once again to the Belgrade Security Forum. As you all know, I suppose I'm no longer involved in politics, and since I'm now Chamber President at the Italian Supreme Court as a judge. But so I'll be very much free to speak about Europe, given my background of commissioner and Minister of Foreign Affairs in Italy. Well, I think when we talk about democracy in Europe, there is one key political goal which is unachieved yet, completely unachieved. The goal is to try or to succeed on reconnecting citizens and institutions. This is the point. There is an increasing, a growing gap between millions and millions of Europeans and the institutions in Brussels. This is one of the reasons why in my country, one of the most pro-European countries where citizens used to go to vote for the European Parliament by 75%, 78%. Last time it was slightly more than 58%. So I would say disaffection to vote, the idea that Europe is a mix of bureaucracy, rules, as been clarified by the previous speaker, and I would say a technocratic elite trying to dictate what you should do and what you shouldn't. So this is one of the roots of the changing mood also in my country vis-à-vis the European integration perspective. If you think that in the European Parliament today, and I'm very far from the active politics, as I said, there are those representing, I think, more than 30% that belong to Eurosceptical parties or political formation. More than 30%, close to 1/3 of the elected members of the current Italian Parliament. Many of those people are related to, I would say, rely on conservative parties, but the large majority of the Eurosceptical groups in the European Parliament. This is the picture of today, but it's quite easy for me to explain with some examples why this can happen, why in Italy, not only in the rest of Europe, but in my own country that I know better than others, frankly speaking, millions of Italians are persuaded that there is, I would say, a plotting between economic elites, technocrats, and banks that want to orientate the future, the destiny of our country and the rest of Europe. Why is Europe so unable to counter such a very dangerous argument? Because it's very easy to destroy, it's very difficult to rebuild. Why Europe is so unable to explain why, if not true, this feeling is not true? Europe is not explaining. It is giving the impression even to aggravate this feeling of frustration why, I would say, technocrats can decide on everything regardless the opinion of citizens. This is an opinion, but it's becoming very much rooted in societies like the Italian society that has been from the very beginning pro-European, tolerant, open society, full of solidarity. But I come to the examples. During the Greek crisis, Italy was in the middle of a terrible crisis. It was 2012, the end of 2011. Italians have been making really, really huge sacrifices. And you are to recognize with not a single day of general strike, no paralyzing public services, because Italians are so. When we are close to the nightmare, we realize and we change direction. And we got in front of us the Greek crisis. And we Italians, that all used to compare to the crisis states, and we were in a difficult crisis, but not to Greece, we were asked for paying in 3 years 51 billion of euros to contribute to save Greece. And we did, at the expenses of social welfare, at the expenses of the pension system. We did. But how can you explain to the Italian taxpayers, after these kind of sacrifices, after paying 50 and more billions of euros to contribute, and rightly so, to save Greece in a moment of need, how to explain that from Brussels there are some dictating about the fiscal regulation in Italy, or imposing what to do and what not to do on the taxation of this or that asset. That's, frankly speaking, is difficult to be explained. And when it comes, and we will be back again to immigration, how can I explain to my Sicilian compatriots they used to accept and to welcome and to rescue thousands and thousands in the last years of refugees and migrants, that now, after some appeals and many appeals to Europe, nothing has been moving until the leadership of Germany said with a louder voice that solidarity is a key principle for Europe. You can understand this kind of frustration, because we have been making exactly what is making now Germany since many years, and all the rest of Europe was, I would say, listening to the appeals of the ministers, including myself, around the table of the Council with no reaction. How can you explain to the Sicilian taxpayers that they will have to pay even more for Europe with this kind of response? So my answer is the democracy in that sense in Europe is sick. I will be a bit brutal, but we have to redress the idea that democracy can be compatible with summing national egoisms. It's not compatible. Democracy is another story. Sharing values, sharing burden, realizing the spirit of solidarity of the founding fathers. This is the reason why Eurosceptical parties are gaining ground, not because of the capacity of, I would say, speaking well in the public conferences, but because they touch upon the daily life of citizens, while Europe is seen as incapable to protect, incapable to respond, incapable to go towards legitimate need of people that are in the streets, that don't know about, I would say, co-repair or steering groups in Brussels. They know, as the Italian fisheries know, that recently Europe tried to introduce a regulation on the dimension of the mussels that can be taken in Sicily. Can you explain to the people that Europe is regulating these instead of being a protagonist of peace in the world? This is why democracy I define as sick. I would like very much more transparency and democracy in the European institution. Thanks.
Short question.
Sure.
Please.
Did Italy give money to Greece or credit to Greece?
Italy put 53 billion in its budget to contribute at disposal of Greece in case of need, as all the other states did.
Germany didn't give any money to Greece, just credits.
Okay.
And they got money for that. And I suppose it
Well,
is
we
the
were
same.
obliged. No, we were obliged to put at disposal. It's a credit, of course.
It's a credit.
Yeah,
That is just what I wanted to
but
say.
This is
and
on the
you
budget.
earned, and Italy, yes, it's on the budget, but Italy earned as Germany by giving the credit. So just
sure.
because normally if you say you give money to Greece, the people understand it. That was the case in Germany, that Greeks got money from Germans. They didn't. They did credits.
I'm talking about a political issue. People don't know about credit and giving money. People know that we put at disposal of Greece 53 billions. This is a fact. Of course, we didn't give materially 51 billions of euros, but the simple fact that you are ready to disburse in case of need is a political commitment, is not a secondary political commitment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the side question. I think that was, that's also important to clarify. And you know, definitely, I think we'll address later, at least with me, it resonates when you say democracy is sick, and I think definitely we have to look for a solution that will not be of the, you know, the solutions that, or the absence of solution that the same Eurosceptics parties are unable to suggest. But I would like to give the chance to our fourth panelist, Žaneta Ozoliņa, to basically do her, make her introductory remarks. Before that, let me start with a sort of a stereotypical account on Latvia, because Latvia has been the poster child of the austerity policy, and you know, I don't know, when we think about who are the fittest people in Europe, that's probably Latvians, because you survived the biggest dip of GDP and you resurrected as a country, and there you are. You basically prove everybody wrong, in words of some. And I use this with a great degree of reserve. But before I pass the floor, just to mention that Professor Ozoliņa is a political scientist at the University of Latvia. She's director of the Center for International Politics. She herself is a prolific author and editor of many articles and as well German journals, and she has been part of various experts commissions, one of those under the auspices of the President of Latvia. So we heard sort of EU, let's say that, I don't want to say that we heard a German and Italian view, but we heard one view that comes from the big member states of the European Union. When I looked about Latvia and where Latvians are today, you know, it's almost impossible not to find a sort of a dissonant views today in Europe. It seems that yes, economically it's getting there, but then people still think that, oh, economy is in a bad shape. Vast majority, more than 2/3 stated that. But when asked about how is your family doing, apparently in the latest Eurobarometer, they said, oh, but my family is fine, you know, like 70%. How is today not only to live in Latvia, but how is the Latvian democracy, and how that resonates with this general issue of a small member state trying to find its own voice, but also trying to get its voice heard on the big scene of the European Union?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving the floor and inviting to this fantastic conference. When it comes to Latvia, you give me approximately 5 minutes and asking a question which at least needs some 1.5 hours, but I will try to do my best. So first of all, why Latvia is doing well and why people are happy? Because Latvia was occupied 3 times in the last 70 years. So living 50 years under occupation, the period which we are experiencing now is definitely glorious days. We are free to vote, we are free to choose, we are free to join international organizations, and yes, our voice is heard because we have been just recently presidency of the European Union, and we've learned that the presidency depends very much on commitment of individual country, but not on the size. So, and of course, I do not want to offend my Italian colleague, but there was a saying in the Commission that they would like to have Latvian presidency last forever, not to come back to Italian presidency. So it shows that a small nation, organized, very focused, very committed, can achieve substantial results. What is the state of democracy? The state of democracy, of course, is not a simple one. Because country which has experienced very difficult years of transition from one regime to another regime, joining 2 institutions, having a very difficult neighbor next to our doorsteps. Democracy is very diverse. But I wouldn't join the voice of pessimism about the state of democracy in Latvia and in Europe in more general way, because everything depends on the chair where you are sitting in. So looking backwards at our experience, I think that democracy is in a very good shape, because the whole history of the European Union is a history of permanent conflicts, permanent contests, competitions. But this is the strength of the European Union, whatever conflict we are having, because of different principles which we are really putting very high on our agenda, as solidarity, as respect to human rights, respect to European values. We are always able to get out of different conflicting situations. Yes, Latvia was going through very difficult financial and economic crisis years, but if I look at different public opinion polls, and in Latvia we have this quite a routine type of a study starting from 2005, which is called Democracy Audit, How Democratic is Latvia? And you can Google it, so Democracy Audit in Latvia, and find it's a very thorough analysis based on quantitative and qualitative research. So this summer, the last one was published. And according to all indicators which are developed by IDEA Institute, Latvia is demonstrating progress. And I'm asking myself why we are so committed to the progress. Yes, indeed, one of factors which was driving Latvian development and progress, it's rooted into the occupation years. So we really appreciate our independence. And probably very many countries take independence as granted. So we do not take it as granted. We work very hard really to protect and to make our democracy and independence flourish and be at the core of what we are doing. But probably finalizing my introductory remarks, because again, it's a very wide topic. So Latvia is a quite unique country in the European Union from very many perspectives. But one is probably make Latvia very different. So we do not have a single political party which is building its capital on Euroscepticism. We can criticize the European Union, we don't like distribution of direct payments, we don't like quotas, we don't like different standards imposed by the European Union. But this is a technocratical issue. It's not an issue of basic values. So whenever there are attempts in the country to start some kind of Eurosceptic initiative, it always stops. Not a single party was elected in the parliament on the basis of Eurosceptic values. And this is because democracy is quite strong. We really appreciate those achievements which we have achieved in the last 25 years. I will stop here.
Thank you very much. You know, you made me a sort of a proud former donor, because we know the audit, and if I can use it as a platform to advertise it, it's really on the national level. That's one of the most comprehensive efforts that I've seen, at least in Eastern Europe. But also what you mentioned about Labour, the party, there is no single party that has Eurosceptic views, and that how you saw that, or you label it a technocratic issue. I think it's relatively different to what we heard before. I will explore that later when I turn back the question to the panel about where do you see the future, because I think it will be important to see to what extent there is a way, or there is one or several ways to go forward. But before we go to that, I would like to sort of drop in the question that has been here in the corridors, and that's about the effects of the ongoing refugee, asylum seekers, migration crisis, as many have labeled it differently. And as a sort of a segue before we look at how do you see Europe to go forward. Yesterday in her address, Sonja Licht stated that basically as European Union is witnessing the first large migration in the 21st century, the image of European Union as a community of values with high standards of human rights protection is seriously undermined. And I think Sonja Licht is not alone. I mean, the people from the Balkans, but as well others, even outside of the European continent, have resonated with such a view. I don't want to push this view on you. Actually, I would really open the question and ask, do you share this view that actually the image of European Union as sort of a beacon of democracy and human rights protection is endangered? Or what's your view and how the current crisis has undermined or maybe strengthened or done something else to both the image of EU abroad, but also the sort of stability on the inside? I will say, who would like to start on this issue? We can.
May I?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I start. I'll be even a bit tougher than the quote that you just made, because as former Commissioner for Home Affairs and Immigration, I had never seen around the table of a council so huge divisions, so strong national egoisms, so deep lack of solidarity. Because you know what happened? You know that many times the European Council tried to address and solve. The Council of Home Affairs Ministers tried, and this was amid divisions. Qualified majority vote is unprecedented decision, or quasi-unprecedented, to use the qualified majority vote system instead of the normal consensus or unanimity decision. I would be, again, a bit brutal. That's a shame on Europe, because Europe has been always proclaiming the land of rights. So when I look at the lack of solidarity vis-à-vis Greece or Italy or Germany or other countries that are at the borders, I would say we look at the countries like Serbia that looked more European than some European member states on managing this refugee crisis. So why so? Because it's absolutely normal, also in my country, trying to exploit a given crisis for domestic, I would say, political benefit or advantages. This is absolutely unfair, but this is politics. Against this kind of politics, and I thank the leadership of Angela Merkel, we need leadership, because otherwise we simply follow the popular messages. We have to get out of Italy all the refugees, very easy, but these are human beings, these are children, these are women, these are poor, desperate men, and the same applies to the other countries that have been asked to share the burden by getting a certain number of refugees. This is a lack of leadership, this is a lack of effectiveness of a number of not well-functioning European institutions. The functioning of the Council, of course, is at stake, its credibility, because I agree with the proposal put forward by President Juncker, but I don't remember during Barroso's term when a proposal is put forward in a solemn way before the European Parliament, immediately a number of countries reject, dismiss. That way, frankly speaking, this is a problem. And the third element that is playing that game is that a number of European member states are having a tendency to like very much what I called Europe à la carte, choosing what is attractive. Of course, European common market is very attractive. Having no customs barriers is very attractive. But I'm starting having problem with refugees. I close my borders. I block the freedom of movement, which is one of the major achievements, the Schengen Agreement in the European integration process. So I choose what I like, what I don't. This is not, I would say, against solidarity. It's not the commonality of interest and destiny, as used to say De Gasperi, Adenauer, and Schwan many, many decades ago. Commonality of interest and destiny. Where interests diverge and you are riding the horse against Europe because of your national interest, you undermine the credibility of Europe as a whole. This is why I said it's a shame for Europe. We have to try to clean the picture, the face of Europe. We will be able to do, provided that many will be behaving like Germany, like Austria, like Italy, like other states, like here, Serbia as a non-member state of Europe, in expressing wishes and deeds for solidarity. Because, frankly speaking, if we don't address together immigration, refugees issues, we will never succeed. We will be just a group of irrelevant countries vis-à-vis the rest of the world. If you act united, we will have a say in this globalized world while talking about origin countries, Syria, regions where these crises are originated. These are not originated on European territory. And we have to deal with the origin countries, but together, not bilaterally, because otherwise we will be completely irrelevant vis-à-vis China, vis-à-vis big global players. What is the role of Europe? Is nothing if Europe is divided. So this is my opinion, and I will be convinced that forever Europe will be a global player on immigration if we will have capacity to overcome national egoisms. I can understand they can bring vote to this or that political party, but votes are not the equivalent of values. This is a principle very clear in my mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Schwan.
But in a way you have to bring them together, because if you make an opposition between vote and values, and if you did that a little bit earlier, you say this is politics, and the others are values or responsible behavior, etc., you make a kind of contradiction between democratic politics, which is allowed to make all that stuff with nurturing prejudices and playing on all that, on the one hand, and then value decision-making, be it by states of heads of states or whatsoever. So I think the problem is deeper. Take Germany again. The present German government, for a long while, has nurtured all these wordings like burden and difficult, etc., concerning the immigrants, that a general mood was of course strengthened, that we should close our doors, that Angela Merkel suddenly says the real contrary to the whole ongoing politics before, is to be explained, and I'm not so sure it is that it will be really convincing. By the way, Sonja Licht, I wanted to thank you very much, because with this forum you have brought up how important that region is, which is not really estimated in Germany. The Balkans are not really important for Germany. Now they have become important because there are refugees coming through that. But the problem was that for a long while that was the same wording, and even is with certain parties, with responsible ministers, that in general the refugees are disturbing. This is a general mood of wording, and I think in that sense you do not really behave like a responsible politician. If you want really to have a solidarity in Europe, you have also to tackle that problem within the nation states very differently. And therefore I think I don't want to homogenize the national interests. There are very different interests within a national society. And they are also different towards refugees whatsoever. So please, if Angela Merkel now makes a change, okay, but if that is not operated or operationalized into a real strategy, then the contrary will happen, because first of all, okay, We open the doors and then very quickly we shut the doors again, and that will be a backlash again. So you have to be intelligent to practice solidarity. I really like solidarity and the emotion of solidarity, but that means also to be farsighted, not just to work on what we call in German the auf Sicht fahren. That means very short-sighted, like if you go a ski piste and you can't see anything, or in an auto if there's smoke. So what that means is, do not please separate politics, to which you allow all these rhetorical bad doings on the one hand, and then values on the other, because where is democracy? Democracy is not just in the heaven of values. Democracy is in the daily practice, and in the daily rhetoric, and in the daily wording. And it's there where we have to start, and especially in the powerful countries. And one has to see the backsides. I am now pleading for giving a voice even to those who are a little bit anxious, not to Pegida and these rightist extremists, of course not. But there are people who are anxious because they don't know how to do it. So to have a really solidary movement in all the countries, you have to strategically and reasonably think out a policy, and to take into account that the refugee problem has not started yesterday. The refugee problem is old, is year-old, and it has not been dealt with in our country. I don't think it has been really dealt with in other countries. I just have one question. How many emigres did you have during your economic recovering in Latvia? You had a lot of emigres, as far as I know.
Yes.
A large part. If you count that on other countries, I mean, as far as I know, it was nearly 750,000, something like that. And
yeah, but not only during financial crisis. It counts shortly before accession to the European Union and after. Yeah. We had several waves.
Yeah, but if you count that on other bigger countries, that would mean that we would have large migration streams already in Europe if each country, Spain, Italy, Greece, had done the same. This is only the point I have. Yeah.
Thanks. We'll come back to that. Do you want to respond to that?
But it's a different type of discussion.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Okay.
Because it's EU migration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's stick to the refugee crisis, because you're right. I mean, if that, then we will mix with the internal migration within the EU. But I'll come back to that. Your Excellency Davenport.
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, I think I'd like to avoid being polemical on this issue. It's not my role to be polemical. Others may have more of that role than I do. But I think the first thing to say is that, as Sonia said, this is the first big migration challenge that we face in this century, and it's not unprecedented. We've had mass flows of refugees before, but it represents a huge challenge for all of us. It represents a challenge for the European Union, but not only for the European Union, because if you look at the root causes of these flows, there are many other players who have their part to play, and if the root causes are to be addressed, it cannot be done by the European Union alone or by individual European Union member states acting alone. It requires the whole international community to find ways of addressing this. And we haven't found that yet, but that is urgent. And I think the urgency of that cannot be overemphasized. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that Europe has a long tradition of, as we were just pointing to one example, of flows of refugees, and a long tradition of receiving refugees with dignity and with tolerance and with respect for human rights. My own family is a refugee family, and one can't forget that kind of heritage. In tackling something like this, and I couldn't agree with Mr. Frattini more, that the role of Europe can achieve nothing if it is divided on something like this. But I was also pleased to hear Mr. Frattini saying that he welcomed the speech of President Juncker and the call by President Juncker to the European Union, actually, to start to manage the refugee crisis properly and effectively. The fact is, although some people, even in the last 24 hours, have been calling on the European Union to establish effective institutions and mechanisms, the European Union has institutions, it has mechanisms, and it has commonly agreed standards for receiving asylum seekers, which have been built up over time. But they have not ever been put quite to the test that they are being put to at this precise moment. There is an expectation that refugees will be received with dignity. There are common arrangements for processing asylum applications, and there are common criteria for judging those applications, and for judicial systems to determine if someone is entitled to international protection or not. But, and here's where the humility has to come into the picture, it is clear that these mechanisms are not being implemented properly, that the standards are not being met in practice, and that the system that should be functioning is not functioning. The Commission, the European Commission, had, at the last count, issued, I think, something between 30 and 40 infringement proceedings against member states for not implementing their commitments in this area. I think that's probably, that number has increased by now. It's absolutely clear to me that unless we are all in the business of meeting our commitments, implementing our treaty obligations, implementing our laws in this area, and basing what we do as a European Union based on the rule of law, basing what we do on the rule of law, we will not achieve progress in this area. I actually welcomed the Belgrade appeal, because I think it said a lot of things that needed to be said. But it gave me slightly the impression that it was written maybe a few days or maybe a couple of weeks before it was delivered, in the sense that following the appeal by President Juncker, quite a few things have actually been done, quite a few things have been decided. You may say not enough, but on the humanitarian side, the European Council decision to belatedly, but nonetheless decision to allocate another 1 billion euros to the humanitarian crisis. I mean, the problem was that the provision for dealing with and meeting the humanitarian needs had actually been reduced by the European Union and member states collectively over the period before that, which was clearly Aufsichtfahren behavior, actually. But that has been recognised. I think it's also been recognised that, and it was clear from the Council conclusions, that more needs to be done when it comes to supporting the countries which are bearing the immediate brunt of the refugee crisis, namely Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, but also the countries which are on the route or on the transit route, including Serbia, and more is going to be done in terms of supporting. So a package was announced. We're delivering that package of 17 million euros. It may require more, because this is not something which is going to go away quickly, or if anything, the challenges are likely to increase. But whatever we do, whatever our responses, they need to be certainly proportionate. They need to be appropriate and in line with our internationally assumed human rights standards. And it's quite clear that some responses have not met those criteria. As those of you who are based here will know, I have been quite clear that closing borders is not an appropriate way to respond to, or a proportionate way to respond to the challenges, nor is the building of fences or walls an appropriate way of handling this. And we must not allow ourselves to fall into the trap of meeting this challenge in such a way that it actually does undermine so many of the achievements that I think we have to our name as a winner of the Nobel Prize for Peace.
Thank you very much. Professor Ozoliņa, your take?
Yeah, you asked in the beginning what is the image of the European Union's project. And at the present moment, definitely this image is damaged. But in history of the European Union, if we look at different periods of its development, there never been so many crises happening at the same time. So the EU used to be very good tackling one crisis after another, and there were mechanisms, political at place, financial at place. But now, during few years, we have at least 3-4 serious crises which has to be tackled simultaneously, plus with the change of the European Commission, with the change of national governments, so back and forth. So at one moment you can have just a bouquet of different flowers and different colors. But then the question is why still the EU is not getting out of this some kind of a state of confusion. And it seems to me that Professor Schwan definitely used the right word, and it is strategy. So the European Union so far hasn't been good at strategic thinking. So within the sector, yes, we know how to tackle issues. But if you look at refugee crisis, it's not only one sector issue. It has to be really coordination and cooperation among different DGs, different policies, different stakeholders. And unfortunately, this thinking is lagging behind. Why? During the Council, member states had so diverse views, and very often very stubborn one, because the question which was first of all debated, it was the fire type of an issue, how to divide quotas. And just imagine yourself in the shoes of Prime Minister or Minister of Interior coming back home and saying, so we have to take 1,000, 2,000 and 30,000 refugees. So the public response immediately is, okay, we will take those ones, but what are policy instruments afterwards? What the Commission and other member states are offering in just really working in long term, not to arrive at the same situation. And unfortunately, this type of political debate was missing. And it's still missing, by the way. So therefore, again, this is a combination of several issues. It's political leadership, European and national as well. And here values are decisive for that kind of political debate. This political debate has to take place within the strategic thinking of the European Union, how it sees it in a wider global scale, but also regionally. And then the third very important one would be this technical bureaucratic thing, which could lay grounds for how those strategic plans and programs has to be implemented. So therefore, I really see the problem with the strategic thinking.
Thank you very much. You actually already, this is a nice segue into the next round of questions of what has to be done. And you started actually sharing ideas. Maybe we can go in this order. So in a way, you identified a lot of crises. We discussed about the good points, but also the shortcomings. So what's the way out? I mean, what has to be done? And in a way, as the organizers put it in this beautiful brochure, you know, the big question of what's the future of representative democracy in Europe, and obviously referring to the European Union as its preeminent example. So before we pass the floor to the question, I was let's go in sort of in the order of distance. Professor Ozoliņa started, we can continue with Professor Schwan and then till the end. So what has to be done, and what's the future of the, if you want European project, if you want European democracy, pick one, address all, combine them, the floor is yours.
Well, I think that the representative democracy as well on the national level as on the European level cannot be replaced. I do not know another system. But I think that the practical, empirical experience of people have to be much more integrated in that system. And there I come back to what Professor Ozoliņa said. That was, in my view, very valuable. She spoke about the last 25 years of experience and especially the 50 years before of experience. And that means that all the people in Europe have various contexts in which they feel, they make their experiences, and your happiness that you are out of these occupations is a very important factor to also live through other things. Whereas in the southern countries, there's a very different experience around. But what we have in common, I think, is that all the national governments and, of course, also the institutionally more complicated issue on the European level need, so to say, help out of society, because they all function following their ideas how to get to power and how to keep power, which is normal. You need power in a democracy and you have to keep the power. But they are in the temptation to kind of follow imaginated ideas of the people without really testing if they are as they pretend they are. And what the experience is, as well within the countries, especially also transborder, the transborder situation, transnational situation, that you need, in my view, absolutely the cooperation of organized civil society, also of big companies, and also in a way the cooperation with politics. This this triangle is now more and more in the global sphere practiced, by the way. This is not an original idea, to bring them together in order to really discuss long-term procedures or long-term policies. The strategy cannot be just invented in the heads of some statesmen. The strategy has to be rooted in social discussions, political discussions, all over Europe. Therefore, institutionally, for instance, I very much plead concerning the budget, the European semester, to bring together European parliamentarians with national parliamentarians. Because it's only if Latvians and Finns come to know really the situation in Spain or in Greece, if they really see what is the context of these experiences, they can understand the strategies. And therefore, I think we have to mobilize much more organized civil society. This is also a practical problem because they have to be financed, and in a way financed that they keep to be independent, that they will not be reliant on other sources. But without this element of organized civil society, and also without discussing the long-term problems with the sector of business, you won't really come to a solution. Take our refugee problem. In our country, it's very much business which wants to have the refugees on the labor market for very clear, basic reasons. And there is a split between xenophobic nationalists and business, because business needs them and xenophobic nationalists don't want them. And then you have, again, other organized civil society who say, yes, okay, you have an instrumental view on refugees, the business. This is not sufficient. You cannot just look at refugees as possible workforces and not as human beings. This is, again, another perspective. So I think you have to have much broader and long-term discussions within the societies in order to enable the elected representative politicians to really have a long-term strategy. Otherwise, they will always follow what they imagine as being a very egoistic, so-called popular meaning, and by that strengthen that egoism instead of really overcoming it.
Can I just probe one aspect of what you said? Because I think we're here in the Balkans, and that's, you said get power, keep power. And that's very normal for Balkan politicians. And here, for any politician as well. But here, you know, this keep power at some places tends to stay for longer. Is that a risk in some places within European Union? Because, you know, the organizers ask us, they flirted with the idea of democracies versus autocracy. We heard also the sort of technocratic governance and so on. But what I heard you saying, it was more about within the political battle. It was not a fear of authoritarianism resurrecting back in corners of Europe.
The problem of authoritarianism, but I mean, you need power in order to do something. This is, for my view, this is normal. But the problem is if you do that in a context where if you are in power, you are really powerful and rich, and you enrich yourself and all that. And if you are out of power, you are nothing. If you have such a discrepancy between being in power and not being in power, this, of course, instigates to stay in power. But also in Germany, where you would not fall down, gradually, of course, you fall down. There was one minister who told me that when she was not anymore in office, and the first time she realized that she wanted to sit down in the back of the car, but nothing happened because it was her private car. She should have sat at the driver's seat. So she realized that she is not anymore in that position. And I mean, to more sophisticated way, if you have a society and a political system of clientelism, then, of course, to stay in power is extremely important, and you have to more and more slowly, that costs time, develop mechanisms that if you are in power or outside of power, you are still a valuable force in society. When I grew up politically in the 50s and the 60s, the Anglo-Saxon lesson, which we learned from Great Britain, was that the opposition is as important as the government. Also from the point of view of prestige and self-esteem, etc., which is important. Opposition is functionally as important as government. I mean, you would smile. You smiled when you heard that, but functionally it's true. Therefore, you also said at the beginning, of course we need also Eurosceptical forces in order to provoke the selfishness of government, etc. But this idea that the whole system only works if the opposition is regarded as important as government, can prevent the prestigious idea of sticking at power. This is one of the points.
Thank you very much. I saw a lot of nodding here around in the audience. I also hope that politicians in the audience nodded as well. Mr. Frattini, on the solution and the way forward? Or solutions and the ways forward?
Yes, I agree, first of all, with those that said here we need a vision. What has been missing, unfortunately, is a strategic vision that our founding fathers had, for sure. They had a strategic vision. There was the political vision, not purely economic vision. There were many that had the illusion that, I would say, self-regulation of markets and the purely economically or monetary union could be enough for Europe. This was the illusion. What to do? Redressing that illusion and explaining that only a political union can make the difference. Political union means expressing the will of those that are legitimated, that they're representing people, and as large as possible communities to be involved in the preparation, in the strategy, in the discussion. This is political union that I have in mind. I have one of the very few that in my country still speak about federal union. But in my view, I would be dreaming about that it would be absolutely necessary to have a common European foreign policy, a common defense policy, not only a common monetary or economic policy. And on these, we would need a governance. Having a political governance would be explaining to the rest of the world that we act united. This is what also President Juncker said in his presentation of the strategy of 5 years mandate and term of European Commission. If you want to have a say in this kind of globalized world, we have to be united. If we are hugely divided on the strategies on how to address Mediterranean region and the routes of migration and refugees, we have differences. We are still uncertain on what to do with Lebanon and Jordan. Mr. Davenport mentioned the point. These are key points where, unfortunately, Europe is still divided. So, what to do again? In my view, we should evolve towards the abolition of veto powers. Today, we have a situation where a single state on certain issues can block all the rest of the Council, all the other 27. It will be illusory, I don't know, but if you want to have a political union, this is one step. The second step, for example, using majority democratic rules, not as an exceptional case, but as a normality. Majority rules are the rules around the table of those that represent the majority. It's not a case that is a dramatic case like it was in the case of the recent vote at the Council of Ministers of Interior. I'm, for example, in favor of improving the use of referendum in certain cases of top-level decision, not, of course, technical question, but, for example, do you want to have an elected president of European Commission? This should be issue where citizens have to be consulted. I'm in favor of electing directly the president of European Commission. We got an intermediate step because the President Juncker had been designated by the biggest political force, the Popular Party of Europe, is an intermediate step. Could we move towards the direct election of the president? If you want full democracy, this could be a way. I don't know, but we should have something in mind for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years. Thinking about legal instruments to guarantee, I would say, defense of collective rights. In the Anglo-Saxon system, the class actions are largely used. In many countries, including my country, it is not the case so far. So, using experiences that we can get from others that can improve the level of basic democratic right of access. And this would be useful, and I conclude with that, when I started reconnecting citizens and institutions. If you guarantee people that feel protected, feel represented, not by political elites that are likely corrupted or at risk of corruption, instead, people that are consulting the population. This would be the great instrument to create a political union. Creating political union is not a top-down initiative. It should be a bottom-up initiative thanks to the vision of the leaders. Do we have enough leaders having a vision, looking at 10 years on to indicate some guidelines? I'm not so sure. We have some leaders, some are preferring to stick to the past and to keep what has been done so far. In my view, it is not enough, because sooner or later, before the crisis of refugees, before the crisis in the broader Middle East, vis-à-vis China or India, Europe is proving to be so weak, so divided, that no single state, not the biggest Germany or Italy or UK, can do alone vis-à-vis these global issues. This is why I'm thinking about transforming commonalities of interest into commonalities of values. This is quite difficult, but we should, otherwise we run the risk to be irrelevant. I close with that. I like very much to look at President Hollande and Chancellor Merkel signing the Minsk agreement. I would like very much to see institutions of Europe sign the agreement in Minsk, rather than two leaders of two important countries.
Thank you very much. A lot on the institutional design, on the legal remedies, and as well the issue of leadership, which obviously we discussed for a lot. Ambassador Davenport, to add to the list?
Well, I'm not sure I would like to add to any particular list, but I think the first point I'd like to make is that your question on the program was about a common voice, I think, which is perhaps another way of saying that we need a united position on things. I mean, of course, there is a common European Union voice on many issues. On many issues of extreme importance to the citizen, whether it's trade or the economic questions, or whether it's many questions of foreign policy. But there is a lack of a common voice on very many key issues. We just touched on the refugee crisis, where we're only feeling our way towards a common voice. We're feeling our way towards a common voice on questions of energy. And the energy union, which is a key priority for the current Commission. We're, I hope, moving towards a very clear common voice on climate change as we prepare for Paris. I think that is within our grasp. But we can only arrive at a common voice where that common approach exists. We can work to close gaps, but sometimes those gaps, as we see, as experience tells us, those gaps are more difficult to close. And it's also dealing with that is a challenge for us. And there will continue to be issues where it will be very, very difficult to find a common voice. I think looking ahead, I think one other thing I would say is that we should not regard some of the key pillars of the European Union as having been completed. The single market, it's clearly not completed. It needs to be deepened. It's quite clear. There was a very small step this week on roaming charges, which actually, and it won't be implemented for another 18 months, but this kind of thing is necessary and is very important for the individual citizen, because that is how the individual citizen actually experiences the benefits of the European Union and the institutions. But I think we also need to reinforce the point that it's not just the economic issues which bring us together, and I think the points made by Žaneta from the Latvian perspective are really important, because the newly acceding member states were not joining the European Union simply because of the economic and trade benefits, or simply because of the access to structural funding, but because they absolutely, in most cases, passionately believed that this was right for them, for their citizens, for the protection and enshrining of human and fundamental rights for the period ahead, and for escaping from the authoritarian and totalitarian past. And I think we need to remain true to all of that. Just two further points. I mean, we've had a number of slogans during this debate. I'd like to add just two, which sometimes get forgotten. One is subsidiarity, is often forgotten. And in the drive for a common position and for a political union, we must not forget the importance, if we're to stay true to Mr. Frattini's points about connecting or maybe reconnecting with citizens, the ability of national institutions, regional institutions, municipal bodies to take decisions where it's not necessary for it to be escalated is terribly important. And for all institutions, whether it's the European institutions held to account increasingly by the European Parliament, as well as by member states, or national institutions, accountability, which requires transparency and it requires functioning mechanisms to enable that to happen.
Thank you very much. And I've said, you know, being here in the region, it very much resonates when you say it's more about the politics, especially with the with the candidate countries here, because most of their economies are in one way or the other integrated within the European Union, and they enjoy a lot of benefits of accessing that market. So actually, the key values, I agree with you, will be very much into the political domain. As well, in particular for the citizens and the additional protection and rights that people get. I've been really enjoying your discussion, and I think it's probably a good time to turn to the audience and maybe get more questions and maybe more ideas. So I kindly ask you to introduce yourself, and please try to keep your intervention under 60 seconds. If it's 30, that's even better. Okay, I can't see, so I don't know, hands. The people with the microphones can help me. Okay, I have to see hands. Do you see hands? So I don't mind. So if there are no questions, that means you've been, you know, it was crystal clear. It's like everything is yes. No, it's okay. I'm not pushing it. It's okay. We can sink it in. We'll get the questions. Yes, there is one, but it's okay. Take it easy. We'll get questions. You don't, even if they don't have, I have more. So don't worry.
Hello, Carlo Giunipero. I'm political advisor in KFOR. I would like to ask, since there are two speakers that have political experience, what about the construction of Europe with the political parties? Meaning, what about the affiliation between the main political parties in the European Parliament and the parties in the region, in the Western Balkans? Mm-hmm. So is there a thought in this direction, and what are the actions going on?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Let's get, there is a question behind. Let's get one or two more, and then I will turn back to the panel.
Milica Uvalic, University of Perugia. First of all, I would like to congratulate the panel. I'm myself a big believer in Europe, and so it was a fantastic panel, full of optimism, and I really congratulate all the speakers. Now, one of the fundamental issues, of course, in redefining Europe is to find some ways of having more own resources. We know how small the EU budget is in terms of GDP of its member states, unless we find a way that member states contribute more to the budget, and unless we find a way to really implement a fiscal policy at the level of the EU. I think these are some of the key issues, so I would particularly like to ask Mr. Frattini how he views these issues, because as you know, there is Mario Monti who is in charge of this very important issue, but somehow there is no willingness on the part of the member states. But unless we have more money at the level of the EU, there's no way that some key issues can really be addressed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have the political party structures, the money issue. Do we have a third question? No, let's get back to the panel. So political structure or money? What shall we start first? Yeah? Okay, let's go with the political structures, because otherwise it will be too stereotypical to start with money. I think that the question was addressed to Franco Frattini and Gesine Schwan, but I also invite the other two panelists to respond. But let's start with you in the middle.
Well, I think the question is a key one, because personally, I'm very much in favor of this principle of affiliation or linking the political parties in Western Balkans, in other non-EU but candidate countries, with the political families that are represented before the European Parliament. This has at least 3 advantages. The first one is that if a given political party here is affiliated to a family or to a party in Strasbourg, it brings a bit closer the political decision makers of this party to the European issues. This is clear. There are invitations, there are visits, there are exchanges, and all is related to how to make Europe progressing and how to keep links between European institutions, in this case Parliament, and a given political party, maybe in the majority, maybe in Serbia or in other countries in the region. The second advantage is that it facilitates and improves people-to-people contacts that at political level are extremely important. I would say, familiarity of relations under the human point of view are as important as the political relations between political leaders or political officials or members of parliament. So the more the members and the leaders of political parties have contact and keep contacts with families in Strasbourg, the more there is this kind of familiarity that is help to understand European issues, to abstain from positions that are anti-European position, and so on. The third advantage is that for the political parties concerned, having an affiliation in Strasbourg brings, I would say, possibilities, which is normal in Strasbourg, of lobbying for the interest of that country. And particularly if a given country is in a majority, I remember very well when I was Vice President of the European Commission, many delegations, many party delegation coming also from this region, trying to organize meeting to draw the attention of the parliamentary decision makers in Strasbourg or in Brussels, which is another advantage, bringing some benefit in terms of understanding of the problems of the country or understanding need from Europe, from that country. What Europe is requesting from a given country, if there is familiarity, this can be understood a bit better.
Can I test your 3 principles? Just, and I would like to test them in a place where I live. I live in Budapest, Hungary. Would you say that these 3 principles in the case of EPP and Viktor Orban, or EPP and Fidesz, work to the benefit or the detriment of European democracy?
Well, there are some decisions, you know, that not in Hungary, but in Slovakia, if I'm right, the political party that is the ruling party has been suspended from the socialist European family because of some attitude that had been evaluated in a negative way from the Socialist Party. As far as Fidesz is concerned, I think it's anyway important to keep links with the EPP family, because that would allow EPP to strengthen its position and to try to persuade to get another way instead of the current way of behaving from the Hungarian government. Breaking completely links would be the risk of isolation and then would risk to lead to counterproductive solution. But it is very clear that EPP expressed publicly its opinion that is not, of course, in favor of fences and walls and so on.
But has not suspended Fidesz voting rights within
Yes.
the party group.
Yes,
so,
this is true.
No.
Let's ask to EPP.
Yeah,
not
to
to
EPP,
me.
not to you. No. I just want to be, you know, sort of factual on this. And also, I take that the different political groups have different instruments and different ways how they deal with their members. And I could have my opinion about that. Professor Schwan.
I mean, I think Mr. Frattini has brought about a very important point, the personal communication. Because I really think that, of course, politics is also structure and processes, etc., but it is also personal communication in order to understand and to avoid distrust. It also brings about the fundamental problem in the European Union that you have to mitigate two things. The one is a kind of policy, where the policy families are important, and the other are country interests, and they are across. I mean, you have to find a way, as the country interests are, as I said before, never homogeneous, that as there are different ways to define policies, it might be that in Spain, after the next election, there will be a completely different idea about Spanish policies. And the general political dispute about austerity or additional growth is a fundamental problem which is not just tied to a country, but it is a fundamental political problem. And in that sense, the more these political families tend also to discuss about their fundamental strategies and not only about country interests, I think the better it serves the interests of democratic integration of the European Union. And there's another point I would like to take up from what you were saying. At a certain point you spoke about experience, and I think this is a very important thing. We have to a certain degree to go away of trial and error with the further integration of Europe. One way could be that we would be a new constitution and a new integration, maybe even with majority rights. We have already majority rights in a Lisbon Treaty. Or we try to more cooperate and coordinate our foreign policies, our economic first in practical political coordination. And the more we succeed in that, the more we could probably also integrate the institutions. I think the other way around, from above, won't work.
Yes. Thank you very much. The other two panelists, any reflection, contribution? Mm-hmm.
Probably would like to react to what Professor Schwan just mentioned, communications, the role of communication. I think one of the reasons why the European project at the present moment is experiencing the situation of crisis, that it's very, very poor in communication. And it's very good in communicating details, but there is a tendency that those details drown in an ocean of very many other details. So, and in the end, the strategic message, which is extremely relevant, which could keep societal actors on the board and making them part of communication activities, they are just lost on the way of debating details. So therefore, we are using recently this term strategic communication, which is extremely important. But again, you cannot proceed with strategic communication without strategy of the European Union. Yeah.
Communicate.
Yes. Exactly. Or more noise than signal, which obviously we have witnessed in the past months. Let's not forget the other question on the money.
Well, the problem is an old problem on the table of European institutions, the own resources. Well, I remember very well, since the times of President Prodi and then President Barroso fighting at least for keeping a level, a decent level of budget for the European Union. It is one of the effects, one of the consequences, one of the symptoms that while European institutions are in Strasbourg, for example, supporting the activity of the working group chaired by President Monti on the own resources, the governments are reluctant. The Council is reluctant. Why? Because the government are those who have to pay, or to have to pay more, or to contribute more to the budget. So this is the problem. Many are thinking about an European own taxation system. But again, talking about politics and reaction of public opinion, especially if not proper informed and communicated. How can we imagine to put on the table a proposal of an European common taxation without having previously informed, consult, I would say communicated to those that will be the taxpayers? Otherwise, there would be again the reaction, look at the Europe, imposing, putting new taxation, not responding to our needs, and so on and so forth. So there would be another disaffection mood. So how to face the problem of insufficient, because these are insufficient all resources or resources of the budget, by increasing the all resources. But I repeat, many talked about a carbon tax. Many talked about a common minimum taxation on all the 28 member states, an additional taxation in addition to the national taxation rates that are already very high in many member states, including my country. These would be facing the problem of popular reaction. So I don't have a solution, frankly speaking, but I note that the Parliament, European Parliament, is supporting while the Council is very reluctant, exactly because it will be up to the government to explain to the voters at home why they gave green light to increasing the taxation because of Europe. This is the problem, a combination of lack of communication and in some cases lack of leadership, because I agree again with President Juncker, I did with President Barroso, when they used to say, if you want to have from Europe more, you have to give us more. And those who gave us more are the member states. Otherwise, you have to allow Europe to have an European taxation. There is no alternative, but who has the proper answer? Nobody.
Thank you very much. Other comments, or shall we go to the... I think we have time for one more short round of questions, if there are. Okay. No, I don't see. Ah, there's one over here. Mm-hmm.
Alma Rondanini, University of Innsbruck. I would like to ask Mr. Frattini, how can we treat refugees with humanity when Italy has been rejecting ships in the sea and has been sending back immigrants to Libya without respecting the right to asylum? Thank you.
Well, it is very easy. You should know that Italy is by far the country that saved human lives in the high seas from the risk of dying, by far, because of geographic reasons, because now Italy is supported by a number of member states in the European mission coordinated by Frontex. In the past, what happened? There were some agreements that were recognized by the European Union. In some cases, the agreement with Libya had been signed with the co-signature of the European institutions, exactly because there was an European-Libyan agreement, not only a national agreement. There were some cases where Italy has been brought before the European Court of Human Rights, but it's not absolutely comparable with what my country has done. I'm very proud of what Italian police and Coast Guard people have been doing in these years. And I'm very proud of my compatriots, maybe also your compatriots from Sicily, that rescue people in seas and welcome in their house. Sicily is a touristic region. They lost many business touristic opportunities because of their houses occupied by refugees. But they have done, and they are doing now. This is something that we should always highlight. And of course, there were cases where Italy, rightly maybe, has been brought for individual violation of their rights.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more. Oh, there's one more. Okay, last question. And then I will invite you to answer the question and do the closing round.
Thank you, Naim Leo, Institute for European Affairs. Having in mind that the panel has been discussing about the democracy lacking in the European Union institutions, is there any possible way for the European Council of Ministers to be reformed, having in mind that constant elections in member states are somehow preventing European Union to adopt legislation a bit faster? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would suggest that those who feel that can answer this question, go ahead and answer. But as well, then please add your concluding remarks on the panel or concluding thoughts. Let's start from that side now.
I mean, on that question, I mean, I think the only people who can reform the Council of Ministers are those sitting in the Council of Ministers themselves, really. I mean, we've talked about one or two ways in which there could be reforms. I mean, majority, for example, majority voting being extended still further to remaining issues. This is where the future of the European Union, the way it develops, is very much still in the hands of member states, and the extent to which member states are able to share that common vision. And it's no good doing this. I quite agree with Gisela Schwan. It's no good trying to do something from above here only. You have to, if you've got a vision that makes sense, you've got to have it shared. Not just by governments, but also by citizens. So that would be my answer to that. I would only like to make one further point, which we haven't talked about enlargement, but the enlargement policy of the European Union is an example of a policy which is shared, and it's a common policy of the European Union and of European Union member states. I believe that it is very important to maintain the momentum of enlargement. In the case of Serbia, obviously I see it as my mandate, as a mandate of the delegation here, to support Serbia's efforts to move on this path. We heard yesterday again from the Prime Minister the commitment that Serbia has to the European Union path and to European Union membership. And we're about to enter yet again a new phase, because I do believe that we will be seeing the opening of the first chapters in Serbia's accession process before the end of this year.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for bringing the accession. It's not forgotten, and not only because we're in Belgrade, and that's also an important point.
Well. I'll be very clear. Reforming Council of Ministers is mission impossible. Never institutions will reform themselves by themselves. Particularly if you think about extending majority vote, going towards more integration, mission impossible. As Mr. Davenport said, this is in the hands of each and every individual member state. And I have doubts that member states will agree on more sharing on sovereignty around the table of the Council of Ministers. My final remark on this very interesting panel, even though I've been a bit tough about the points of weakness of Europe that I love, I will finish with mentioning and quoting, you will remember maybe Churchill that said, democracy is the worst model except all the others. Europe is the worst model except all the others. I cannot see a better model than Europe moving towards more integrated perspective, but Europe is an achievement, is a result that cannot be lost, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much so. To take up your saying, bringing institutions and citizens together, I think that in fact what we have to achieve is by creating more possibilities of citizens to, also in the sense of subsidiarity, to act and to identify the problems and also to understand how difficult the problems are and how difficult it is to integrate the interests. This is probably the best gradual way to bring institutions and citizens together so that they would not all participate in these institutions, but at least participate in the decision-making process, and by that also understanding better the institutions and identify with them. What you brought up and you took up with the Council of Ministers brings me to the point that I am very skeptical to the proposal which is very often made that the Council of Ministers and also the Council of Heads of State should be made the second chamber of Parliament. I think that is completely false.
Absolutely.
It will absolutely disintegrate, and also, of course, the power of the Council of Ministers and the Council of the Head of State is large, is huge, with administration, with media, with all that. The poor European Parliament will get lost. So I think what we should avoid is to make out of that council a second chamber. But it is spread everywhere, and I think one has really to battle against that, because that will kill parliamentary decision making.
I'm a great believer in killing bad ideas. Sometimes we forget about the power of those, you know. And in Europe, there are some that are really, they need to be killed. Professor Ozoliņa?
Thank you. I will end up with some kind of telegraphic type of a style, like my wish list. My wish list to European institutions, debating new models of governance, not to produce a new white, green, yellow, blue book on governance, because the previous one doesn't work. For member states, my plea would be, don't blame the European Union for what you have not delivered. Yeah. So therefore, member states themselves have to take more responsibility on what they are doing in the European framework. Then I have a plea to academic community where I'm coming from. We all are working in very well-financed EU projects. These are billions who are spent on studying new models of governance, democracy deficit, and so on. Dear colleagues, where your research ends up.
Yeah, right.
In peer-reviewed journals who are read by a very close circle of people.
And in your career.
Yes, so therefore, please share your findings with politicians and make them clear and very well targeted at certain audience. And for all of us, what I wish, to find a balance between common values and common interests. Because Europe without interests will fail, as well, Europe will fail without values. So I wish all of us good luck to find this balance.
Thank you very much. I mean, we could have staged this, you know, as somebody who works with research, this is like music for my ears, because I'm trying to decipher the tons of academic papers, and believe me, even for me sometimes it's a challenge, let alone for a very busy politician, so definitely music. In thanking you, I'm not going to attempt to come up with a conclusion. There's a lot of complex issues. I would like to conclude on a note that listening to you, actually, I recollect one book that I've revisited recently, I know from a long time ago, that's Hirschman's From Passions to Interests, where he chronicles the way how human, at least the Western thought or European thought, has moved from basically acting on passions to acting on interests. Now, listening to all of you, you mentioned many times the values, but also I felt this very positive passion, and I don't fool myself. We didn't invite, the organizers did not invite the negative passions. They also exist in Europe, but somehow I feel a nice mix of interest and passions is something that will bring the continent into a new and positive dimension. And I'm saying that continent, Europe, which is not only the EU 28, which is the EU 28 and the Western Balkan countries, and as well maybe the others who aspire to share the same values, interests, and passions. I ask the audience to join me in really thanking this fantastic panel. Thank you. And I kindly ask all of you to stay where you are. There's like a 3 minutes change of scenery. We will finish by 2:30. We are waiting for the closing speeches of the conference. Thank you.